From TeachIllinois.com, this is the Teacher's Classroom, the podcast that explores current issues and topics in education and how they relate to teaching and students. Here is your host, Matt Weld.
Hello and welcome to episode 14 of the Teacher's Classroom. Today we are going to be talking about the teacher shortage in Illinois with my guest, Dr. Jim Rosborg. Dr. Rosborg has been an advocate of education in Illinois for 46 years, I believe I read. He received his undergraduate degree from Southern Illinois University at Carbondale, a master's degree from Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville, and he completed his doctorate work at the same place. Dr. Rosborg taught math, history, and served as a counselor and a coach for 13 years at Bell Valley District 118 and served 20 years as an administrator. And as a superintendent, he led his school to several awards. Since retiring, Dr. Rosborg has been the director of Masters in Education at McHenry University in Lebanon, Illinois, and has been a very vocal champion of Illinois public education. Welcome to the program, Dr. Rosborg.
Great to be with you today.
So I know that the teacher shortage in Illinois is a very real problem, but I don't think that a lot of the people who know about it really know about it and are concerned. But I think there's a lot of people who don't have it on their radar. Can you just give us a history lesson on the teacher shortage? Like, when did it start, and what are some of the key factors that have happened along the way?
The main start of the teacher shortage in Illinois was around 2009. There were a couple things prior to that. I think the long-term effects of the No Child Left Behind Act on vocational programs, fine practical arts, and PE has led us to where we're at to some degree, but most of this has been created in our state. The biggest thing occurred in 2010 with the beginning of the new Illinois Basic Skills Test, and I think we're going to talk in more detail on that later. That's called the Test of Academic Proficiency, and currently we have only about 23% of candidates passing that test. It's ranged usually between 17 and 18% this last year. Very destructive to overall candidates. You also had Illinois instituted its own unique requirement for graduates to have proficiency in taking classes in ELL, special education, reading methods, and content area reading, which has made it difficult for out-of-state requirements. Then they really, for 3 years, just absolutely killed out-of-state individuals trying to get jobs in this state when they said that all candidates had to have an Illinois professional educator license. So basically, there was no reciprocity. Then you add to it, retired teachers couldn't sub if they let their license expire, yet we were allowing individuals with 4-year degrees who had not taught to substitute. Never made a lot of sense to me, but we did it. We had then the no budget for 3 years and the loss of MAP grants, and so which really impacted the poor and minorities trying to get into the field. We had a total change of the principal licensure, which has drastically lowered the amount of candidates getting into the principalship. Another biggie was the change of retirement age to 67 in 2011. And so when you have neighboring states with retirement ages of in the lower 50s, that has led a lot of people to go out of state. And then even at the university level, because of the lower enrollments caused by state action, the universities raised tuition, which further negated the abilities for the financially disenfranchised and minorities to get in the field. So it's been kind of a perfect storm on that, Matt.
So you talked about a lot of things there. Let's talk about that TAP test, the test for academic proficiency. 20 years ago when I took the exams for certification, there was a general test and then a content test. And so what was the purpose? Like, what was the rationale behind changing the test?
Well, you had people at the state board and some of your grant foundations thinking there were too many candidates in education, and so they were going to fix it. Well, they fixed it all right. You have what happened in the 2010 with that change of the basic skills test. I give you a good example. McHenry University at that time had 89% of its students passing on the first try, which is one of the higher numbers in the state. When this TAP test, the test of academic proficiency, was put into effect, McHenry had 27% of its students pass on the first try. And this was also one of the highest in the state. So you have a situation now over the years where we're sitting now between 17 and 23% passage. So you have people, they can't get into it. Now there's been, the state did switch to, they added the ACT when things got so bad, they added the ACT where you have to have an average of a 22. That in itself is another problem of the test of academic proficiency. It's not an average score. You have to pass all four areas. And included in that area is, for example, mathematics, where you're having analytic, geometry, trigonometry skills, advanced algebra questions for individuals that are teaching elementary school. It's just ridiculous. And then, as you said, we still have the content area test. So it's not about rigor. Everybody still has to pass the content area test. But when you have a basic skills test, like at McHenry, an individual can't get into the educational program without passing the basic skills test, and that's pretty much the way it is statewide. It has dramatically lowered the pool.
So can you talk a little bit about the students at McHenry? Do they retake the test? How gritty are they?
Most of ours are gritty, but you have to understand if they don't pass it, then they can't enter it. So that just makes a student have to take more classes that aren't necessary while waiting to get into the educational program. So a lot of them give up. There was a time when Illinois actually had a rule that you could only take the test 5 times and then you were out of education. You could never get into it. They have since switched this, that you can take the test numerous times, which is good. That's been a positive move forward. But our numbers have just dramatically lowered. And you can see this is throughout the state. When I went to SIU Carbondale, there were 26,500 students. Now there's 14,900. Eastern, 11,200 to 7,200. It has major impact. In fact, I just got recent data I got from the State Board of Education, where last year we had 305 students total in the state take the mathematics test, when it was 956 in 2013. And then science is down to 375. And so when you only have 375 people in science and 305 in math statewide, we've got real problems. We can't, we have way too many. So, and these numbers were artificially inflated at the state board that we had too many candidates. And I go on record saying, as superintendent, I'd much rather have 24 candidates and pick the best one out as opposed to having 1 or 2. And as a matter of fact, throughout Southern Illinois, I just got a call from this morning begging me to try to help candidates because there's many jobs that are not being filled throughout this state now.
Well, and we're at the end of July at this recording, and school's right around the corner. I'd like to touch on that a little bit later. So one question I had, if the TAP test ACT equivalent is 22, what is the minimum requirement to get into college in general? It's much lower than a 22. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, and in fact, some analysis have been done on the TAP test that it's equal to a 26 on the ACT. So we highly recommend all of our students to take the ACT and not take the TAP test but even the 22, here's the thing, as a superintendent, some of my very best teachers struggled academically themselves because of, but they were great teachers because they were able to help that kid that was struggling in school. Some of my teachers that got straight A's, and some of them were great teachers, but I'm just saying, a lot of times those teachers struggled with the struggling student because it was easy for them and they couldn't understand why it wasn't easy for that student. At the elementary level, I wanted a teacher that knew the basic skills up to an 8th grade math ability, but yet loved those kids, understood their needs, took time with their individual needs, and worked to make them successful citizens. We are taking that component away from education, and it's a shame. We are taking away the component of minority teachers teaching minority kids. That's a real problem. Our minority kids need good role models in the classroom, and it's just not happening now. So something has to be done to help that for sure.
Well, I know my dad was a elementary principal, and I can remember him telling me that as he was urging me to go into education, that he would rather hire a C student than an A student for just that reason, because they had better empathy with their students.
Yeah, we have had people make rules for teachers that do not understand the process of a successful classroom and making a successful citizen. And we are paying the piper for it now.
Mm-hmm. Another problem that you brought up was that so many Illinois college freshmen are heading out of state. I know my daughter is guilty. She got a full ride out of state, and because she got nothing from an in-state school. And I'm assuming all that goes back to the budget and lack of budget in the past years.
Well, that's a major part of it, the lack of budget. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Illinois has more high school seniors leaving the state than any other state of the union besides New Jersey. And that was reported in the Champaign. I read that in the Champaign News Gazette this past January. But a lot of this has to do with what you're saying, the finances and lack of scholarships, the threat of impact on the MAP grant. But they're also leaving because I know in education, some of them now, and I'm happy about the new reciprocity bill, but some of them are actually going to other states so they can meet the basic skills requirements of those other states, not have to take the TAP test, and then hopefully come back to the Illinois to teach. But the problem occurs is that a lot of these students, when they go out of state, they never come back. And so what's the incentive for them? And then when you have a retirement age and they read about and they study about in college that their retirement age in Illinois is 67, and then for example, they can stay in Missouri and retire in the lower 50s. Now, I had no problems with Illinois extending that retirement age from 55 up a little bit, but to go to 67, I'm 67 years old right now in my beginning my 47th year in education, and I can't even think what it would be like for me being a kindergarten or first grade class right now. I'm sure a lot of them are thinking the same way, so they're leaving the state of Illinois.
Yeah, that's a shame.
I think one of the things on that, I should mention it, I think another thing that's occurring is the fact that other states are seeing our weakness and they're beating the tuition rates. Some students can go out of state now and get their tuition at a cheaper rate than staying in the state of Illinois because of the rapid raise of tuition in Illinois.
So what can be done about these issues? You mentioned lowering the TAP test requirements. I read in one of your articles that you don't support eliminating a basic skills test, which I can understand. But lowering that for the Illinois college freshman problem, we obviously need a budget. What can the universities do?
Well, I think the university have to look at themselves at their tuition rates, and I think of my own son, my oldest son, who went to the U of I, $11,000 a year, and now it's up to $28,000 a year. I look at McHenry, our tuition rates at the graduate level have gone up 66% in the last 10 years. I think the universities have to look at that. You get to the point, what I call the law of diminishing returns, where your tuition gets so high. Let's say you have 10 students that will enroll in a class at $300 an hour, and then you have 0 students sign at $400 an hour. Well, where's your revenues? And I think university is going to have to look at that too. But this state has to change its TAP test. In fact, I would can the TAP test, and as I said, I never thought I'd say that. I'd go back to the old basic skills test. See, you still have content area tests, and that's what our legislators forget. The rigor is still there, but people have to have access. And they also forget that people that are getting into college are some of the best students that Illinois had in high school. So once they get into college, you just can't take away their ability to achieve their career dream. Mm-hmm. Another thing that I think the state needs to do is, I'll give you a good example. The only way I could afford to go through college is I had a teacher tuition scholarship when I went through college. And I think the state needs to reinstitute that. Part of the deal for my scholarship, and again, you have to understand this, I understand it's 45 years ago, but I had to teach in the state of Illinois for 5 years, or I would have had to pay back that tuition. So I think in this situation right now, incentives have to be made to get people back into education. I also think this state needs to change its attitude of its negative approach towards educators and setting educators up to fail. You know, we've gone through 40 years of testing now, Matt, and the same school districts that had low test scores in 1986 have low test scores in 2018. So, you know, we're going to have to change our attitude. Recent thing the state did, for example, on the SAT test, they established what the meets or exceeds the passing score, what we call the cut score or the benchmark, 50 points higher than the College Board, which has researched for the last half century what a good score is to predict success in college. And Illinois sets its rate to 50 points higher. That just sets schools up for failure. The recent ESSA they set up for most schools are going to be considered to be tier 3 and tier 4. And most individuals don't even aware this is going to happen, but it's going to happen in the next 2 years. There's just a lot of things attitudinal wise at the state level that has to change.
One other thing that you mentioned as we're trying to institute some fixes here is that a lot of these happened at the statutory level, right? They were passed by the legislature, so it's not an easy fix. Was that your point? That's
another thing that occurred between 2008 and 2014 under state board leadership. State board was throughout my career has been pretty smart to try to keep things as much as regulatory as possible, so that when they made mistakes, they could change that simply at the state board level. But what the state board did between 2008 and 2014 is they set the legislators up, because instead of making it regulatory, they made it what we call statutory. So they took it through the legislature. So now when all these mistakes are just obvious that they've taken place, it makes it harder to change because these changes have to go through the legislature. And so consequently, it has complicated the renewal process to fix some of these drastic mistakes that were made between 2008 and 2014.
Right. All right. So looking ahead to this school year, you mentioned you got a phone call this morning about people begging for candidates. Do you see a lot of unfilled positions as we head into the new year?
I do. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of positions because, and districts are totally changing their procedure. I mean, for example, the state always wants districts to save money, but I know a lot of districts are offering financial incentives just to get special ed candidates, math candidates, science candidates, industrial arts candidates, PE candidates. And I never thought I would see this, even social study candidates.
Right. And so that's this year. What if we keep going on the current track, what do you see in like 3 or 5 years? I imagine that retirement rates are going to increase because the baby boomers, right? There's a big chunk of people that are reaching retirement age.
On top of that, it used to be where people would have maybe worked a little longer, but every educator that I talk to now, that's all they talk about is how much longer they have so they can get into retirement, because the Constitution protects people in retirement with 18 shalls in the Constitution. So, people are retiring just as fast as they can, so that because there's always that threat that the retirement incentives are going to even get worse. So here's what I see in the future. And I saw this in the future, I hate to say it, but in 2009, and I was considered to be an obstructionist at that time. I've grown to be more of a realistic advisor. But unless the state deals with some major issues, the recent legislation that they passed is on reciprocity and retired teachers is excellent. That's a small step forward. But until we deal, like, for example, Michigan just totally got rid of their basic skills test just to try to get candidates. That just happened recently. But unless Illinois adapts their requirements on their basic skills test, and unless they adapt their 67 age requirement on retirement incentive, they're going to continue to have problems. And they do have to look at the payment of teachers and raising salaries. But that, again, that's from a state that's billions of dollars in debt because of the amount of money that they've taken from the retirement system over the years. So these changes, that's, to me, the first two steps. Well, there can be three major steps. Change the basic skills test, lower the retirement age, and quit having negative rules that give the schools in this state a negative look at how they're doing. This is just not fair. In 2002, I read where Illinois was considered in the top 5 of higher education universities in the nation. Well, you don't see that anymore. And that's all because of legislative, in my estimation, it's all because of legislative and state board changes that have occurred since the year 2000.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. All right, I'd like to go back just a little bit. And as a superintendent, all right, so put your superintendent hat on. What happens in a school when you don't have a math teacher? Like, you had somebody retire in the spring. You've had you've known probably for 3 years that they were retiring. So you've been looking for a candidate and you cannot find one. What happens?
Well, I've talked to some superintendents that are in that situation, and you only have basically two choices. You raise class size. There are no class size restrictions in the state of Illinois, or you try to get certified teachers just as bodies in the classroom, even though they're not certified in that particular area. or you just don't. What's happening in a lot of rural schools, they just don't offer the classes. They don't offer your advanced math classes such as trigonometry, analytic geometry, and calculus. They don't offer your chemistry and physics classes, which are all necessary for those students to be successful in the college environment. So that's about the only thing they can do. They've got to have an adult body in those classrooms. And so that's really not a good solution, but it is a solution that I think is going to be used.
So what can we as individual teachers, right? Because the audience of this podcast, I think most people listening are teachers and administrators. You talked about negativity. You've talked about, a negativity toward the teaching profession as a whole, about the teacher shortage. What can we do? It seems like such a big issue. What can Mr. Weld in his 7th grade classroom do?
Well, first of all, educators are terrible at public relations, and many times we just say, well, this is going to change. Well, when are educators going to figure out that when it changes, it hasn't gotten better? Educators have to be more active politically. They have to be more active in talking to their legislators. They have to write letters to their legislators. I'm more than happy they can use the research data that individuals such as myself and others have now. The facts are clearly there in regards to the teacher shortage, and we have to get things changed, and we have to put more pressure on ISB not to just make changes based on opinion, but limit those changes to research. I think we need to encourage ISB to totally relook at some of the rules that they were implemented between 2008 and 2014. That has to be relooked at. Rules in regards to the new federal education law, ESSA, needs to be looked at. Rules regarding cut scores on tests need to be looked at. There needs to be a total look at what we are currently doing, because what we are currently doing isn't working.
So do you think this grassroots push for change, I'm thinking about the leadership of this here. Is this something that needs to be led by the teacher unions, by districts themselves and educating their communities? There's that fine line of education and then coming across as being whiners. So I'm wondering.
Well, we always get accused as whiners and wanting to reduce rigor. I encourage everybody to look up the word rigor in the dictionary and see what it says. But the fact of the matter is, the unions, from my standpoint, I would love to see both the IEA and the IFT work more closely together instead of being competitors. I would like to see them and work with the alliance, the administrative alliance, and come up with, and I think some of that's happening through the Vision 2020. But I think all of the educating groups need to work together and see on issues that they can come to consensus with and put pressure on the legislators to change. I mean, if we can't come to consensus on this teacher shortage, I don't know what we can ever come to consensus with. And if we can't come to consensus about the prevailing attitude of educators, it just has to happen. There has to be a uniform effort by all education groups. And I think there has to be work with business and industry I think business and industry has to take responsibility in training some of their own employees if we want to improve the force. We have to change our process because of No Child Left Behind. It's said over and over again, our vocational education in this country is really weak right now. These are all things that have to be looked at, and a pretty rapid change needs to take place if we want to fix this mess.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like a dilemma that hopefully all of us can come together and focus some of our energies on making this a priority, because, the future of education, I think, is at stake. And it seems like if we want public education to continue the way it is, we need to fix this.
And I agree. And the big dilemma Illinois has, it's not going to be an easy fix, is our legislature has got this state in such a financial mess that generally to fix some of the things you and I have talked about today takes money. And this state's going to have to figure out a way to generate revenue. And I think one of that is to re-encourage businesses to come back to this state. Now, that's the only way we're going to fix it is to invest in education.
Yeah. All right. Well, Dr. Rosborg, I appreciate your time this morning. It's been a great conversation. I hope that this invigorates some people to reach out to their legislators, and hopefully we can all work together to get this fixed.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it, and let's all continue to work together to try to make things better for the future students of this state.
Perfect. Thank you all for listening to the Teacher's Classroom, which is part of the Illinois Area 5 Professional Development and Innovation Initiative. I'm your host, Matt Weld. Please subscribe to today's episode and share it with your colleagues. You can follow Teach Illinois on Twitter at TeachILPD, and I can be found at Matthew Weld. You can find and subscribe to the Teacher's Classroom on iTunes, Google, SoundCloud, pretty much wherever you find your podcasts. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll see you all right here next time on the Teacher's Classroom.